for a 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. My name is A.J. Spiker. I'm the co-chair for Ron Paul 2012 in Iowa. I am also one of the 17 members of the Republican Party of Iowa State Central Committee, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of Ron Paul's campaign. Today you're going to hear from somebody who has a long voting record of adhering to the Constitution and to the principles that the founders believed in. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to the Thomas Jefferson of our day, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you. That was such a nice welcome. You know, I don't know if you heard, but we had a little trouble with our scheduling today. We weren't sure where we would get to and when. We left Texas pretty early and on time and got into Des Moines on time. But then when we were supposed to go over to Council Bluffs, on our way over to Council Bluffs, our plane would start. But my answer was, the bad news is the plane didn't get off when we had problems, but the good news was it was on the ground. So didn't get to Council Bluffs, but I was able to talk to a crowd, I imagine similar to this, you know, over the telephone. And that's not quite as nice as being able to see the people that you're talking to. So I think it's wonderful that you did come out, and I appreciate that very much. And I'm sure you have many of the same concerns that I've had, or you probably wouldn't be here today, because we do have some serious problems. You know, as serious as they are, you know, when you look at foreign policy, that's messed up. The spending's out of control, the debt's out of control. You know something that the monetary system is out of control too. You know, and one way you just sort of like, you throw up your hands, what are we going to do about it? But, you know, I don't think it's all that complicated. I think we've gotten ourselves into this mess because we haven't had enough. We've only had a very few who even paid a little bit of attention to the Constitution. If we sent only people to Washington that cared about our Constitution, we call it, I think we could solve almost all of our problems.
Yeah.
The financial crisis, of course, is dating back to 2008, you know, about the year we were having the last election. And the bailouts started coming in, and the Federal Reserve started getting involved. But the world has changed a lot in these last 4 years. I don't think it should have been unanticipated, because those individuals that I have studied for many, many years, the Austrian free market economists, actually predicted this would come because of what has happened to the monetary system. And it was in the early 1970s where we as a country decided, you know, we don't have to have a gold standard, we just print the money and everybody will love it, and that's how everybody will be rich. And it worked for a while because people trusted the system and didn't too much, but it came to an end. One thing that is significant and should give us somewhat of encouragement, and that is that when we look at the Federal Reserve and Treasury and big government and the foreign policy people and all this, I mean, it's just so overwhelming. But there are some economic laws, and there are some laws that are natural laws to us that are more powerful than governments. You know, they might say, oh yes, we have control of the money and we're not going to let you print the money, but we're going to print the money. Well, they might do it for a while, but eventually it catches up. So we have truth on our side, and I think that's what's happening right now in these last several years, is that people are realizing, even those who have been strictly on the receiving end, figuring, you know, I'm going to get something from the other half for as long as I want and accept it. But even those who are on the receiving end are getting a little bit worried, because they know this country's in trouble, that we are bankrupt, we've spent too much, and this debt just is unsustainable. But those of you who have worked for a living would like to keep what you earn, you know, are getting pretty tired of it, especially after you saw what happens on the bailouts. This bailout, I think, you know, in the long run, it's going to be very healthy, because it woke up a lot of people. They came, I don't know if you recall, but it was during the campaign last year, or in 2008, when it said we had this emergency crisis. Then this was during the last administration. and they announced that they had an early stimulus package in '08, but then toward the fall is when they really got annoyed with how bad the situation was. So they had another package in '08, and during the campaign, the two major candidates, suspended their campaign to run back, and they both voted for the bailout. And that, I think, is really what ignited the grassroots movement. The people, that have been so frustrated. They're in the Tea Party movement, the constitutionalist conservatives, and everybody just said, enough is enough. Because they frighten people in Washington so often to get things done. So they said, you've got to bail them out. You've got to bail out Wall Street. You've got to bail out the banks, or we're going to have this terrible depression. And in some ways that was true. But the depression would have been on the big banks and the big corporations, but instead the bailouts went through and they got the bailout, and who got the depression? The people got the depression, and now we have rising prices, jobs going away, houses being lost, and there's no end in sight right now. The IMF has a new manager of the IMF, not that I have much respect for the IMF, but they're saying that, their economists are saying this country and all countries are in big trouble. Europe's in big trouble. But it is all related to what we've been doing, because since 1971, when the dollar broke away from gold, it meant that we could print as much money as we wanted. And the world, for some strange reason, continued to accept dollars as if they were gold or backed by gold. So the whole world is flooded with dollars, and they use dollars in their reserve. So all of Europe has dollars floating around, and they're in reserves, and our dollar is still fairly strong compared to other currencies. And purchasing power keeps going down, but compared to other currencies, it's still a currency that people look to. And that means the other countries are that much worse off. So even this past week, we had our Secretary of the Treasury over in Europe deciding how we are going to be bailing out Greece and Italy and Spain and all of these other countries. But there's a limit to that, and they're up against a wall on this. And today, probably at this very minute, the Fed is still meeting, and they'll have the announcement tomorrow, and they're going to come up with a new announcement. And guess what? I shouldn't say a new announcement, another announcement. And guess what it's going to be? We're going to print a lot more money, and that's supposed to be the solution. And and we got into this trouble by printing too much money. Most all the economists in Washington now say, well, it really started with this guy called Greenspan, because he kept interest rates too low too long. How do you keep interest rates too low too long? That's printing a lot of money and try to cheapen the value of the dollar. And that was a major participant in the housing bubble. Then the crisis hit, and what was the solution there? Print more money, spend more money, run up more debt, and regulate more. That's how we got into the trouble. And then they wonder why it doesn't happen. So once we had the Greenspan quantitative easing, and then you had QE1, QE2, and now I consider them in the midst of the QE3 right now, because they're keeping, Bernanke has promised, we're going to keep interest rates at 0 to 1% for 2 more years. The only way he can do that is churning out new money. But what does this do? It gives the banks the big benefit. They get the money for free, then they buy treasury bills at 3 or 4%, and all of a sudden they're making money again. So what I'm tired of, and I imagine you're getting pretty tired of, is the system wasn't designed to keep the wealthy wealthy. The system was designed in this country, and our Constitution was designed to restrain the government and let the people get ahead. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And that's what all of us try to figure out exactly how we got into this trouble. Today I was asked a question over the telephone at Council Bluffs. And, well, how did we do this? When did we lose our way? Well, it was gradual, it was insidious, and I think there are 2 types of people in Washington I've met. There's one group that really likes to tell you what to do. I think I enjoy it. They're authoritarians. And they also believe you don't know what to do with your own life or your own money. So that fits them quite well. Then there's another group who tend to be dependent on others. They go, oh, well, you know, if my congressman will promise he'll take care of me and I can get this and this and this, why not? And it worked for a long time. We were such a wealthy country. So you have people who want to be authoritarians, and sometimes I use a stronger word than that. but then the others who want to be on the receiving end. And those of us who have believed that we'd like just more self-reliance, we'd like to be able to take care of ourselves. We believe that our rights and our life come from our Creator. We believe in our liberty, and we ought to be able to keep what we earn. And there's people who have believed that, but many of us who did, we got a little bit complacent and you know, allowed it to slip away to the point where the crisis kept building, and all of a sudden it's declared now that we are getting poorer. We're in debt. There's still a lot of wealth, but a lot of it's based on debt. The jobs aren't here. And matter of fact, I don't date our crisis starting in 2008. I mean, it was building, you know, for 30 or 40 years. But the downturn has been for 10 years. Really, I think the announcement of the downturn in our economy came with the NASDAQ bubble. And people overall have gotten poorer since there. Their standard of living is down. And it is a saying in Austrian free market economics, if a country destroys its currency through inflation, inflate the money supply, devalue the currency, that there is a transfer of wealth. And the transfer of wealth goes from the middle class to the wealthy. If you have sound money in free markets where people assume responsibility for themselves, what you have is you have a larger middle class. And there was a time, certainly when I was in high school and college, you know, people talked about the strength of our middle class. But our middle class is getting smaller right now, and I think that's very, very dangerous because there's still a lot of money out there, a lot of control, but it's getting smaller and smaller group of people who are making these controls. And unfortunately, they're in positions of influence in Washington. They have a lot to say about who's the Secretary of the Treasury. They have a lot to say who's in the Federal Reserve System. And they have a lot to say what kind of a foreign policy we have. And the real tragedy is those individuals that I believe have a lot of control are very much in charge of both of the, the political parties. And that's why we get into this trouble. Just think about it. Republicans and Democrats fight all the time, and we believe in this, and we as Republicans certainly have a better argument for less taxes and less regulations and all. But what did we do when we had the presidency and the Congress, the House and Senate? Did we cut anything? Remember the old days? There's a few people here might remember the old days when Ronald Reagan ran. We're going to get rid of the Department of Education. I'd like to do that. Get rid of the Department of Education. We don't want that. But we do need to cut spending and not just say, well, we're going to raise taxes when the good jobs are going overseas and the wealth isn't. Raising taxes will not work. But we as people have to decide what the role of government ought to be. And of course, the guideline comes from our Constitution. The founders didn't like the role of government under the king, so we once again have to ask that question. And I believe all political action, everything that guides me in what I do, and fortunately it goes along with the Constitution, I believe our purpose should be the preservation of liberty. I think that is... conviction that the greatest number of people will be taken care of better than anything the government can do. A lot of times what they want to do is turn around on us and say, oh, you weren't for the housing program. That means you don't want poor people to have houses. Oh yeah, look what happened. The rich made all the money and they get the bailouts and the poor lose their houses. So this whole thing about, that if you believe in liberty, you have no humanitarian concern. This is one thing I've come to a firm conviction. Because all of us, I believe, have humanitarian instincts and we do care about our fellow man. So if we do, what is the best system of government? To me, it's a free society and a sound money system and free markets and property rights and contract rights. This whole idea that we say, well, you gotta have these safety nets and you gotta have, take care of people. It sounds good, so whether it's runaway welfareism or socialism, it hasn't worked work very well at all. If you look at all history, if you look at the history of famines throughout all recorded history, famines do not occur in countries that are free. They occur in authoritarian countries. We still have hundreds of countries around the world still suffering. I mean, the African continent, they still suffer. But they don't have freedom either. And yet, what I fear is that we've slipped away of our confidence and our understanding and our willing to defend these principles of liberty. And that's what this campaign's all about, to buck up the confidence and the understanding of how freedom really works and not be afraid of it. Because that is what I think made our country great. We were the freest and the most prosperous country. We were never perfect, obviously. But if we sit back and say, well, I think the government needs to do this and the government needs to do that, all of a sudden the people are forgotten about. Now, as far as cutting goes, we do need to cut. Now, I would, if we get into a major crisis where we have to start from scratch, I'd start from scratch, and I wouldn't have very much in Washington, D.C., I'll tell you. But I think we should also plan to work our way out of this. Just as an individual tries to work their way out of a bankruptcy, I think we should try to do that. And I believe, and from talking around the country, I believe that the greatest reception I get is, yes, they agree with this, but can't we have priorities? I say yes. Why don't we have priorities where if we have conditioned the people, if we have conditioned the needy who are getting health care, the elderly that are dependent, is that where we're supposed to cut? Or should we not consider cutting all this overseas spending and bringing since the wars have been going on, we spent over $3 trillion, and it's endless. One thing, the real tragedy is how many of our people have gone sent over there and come back, and we've lost over 8,000 Americans. We had 40,000 severe injuries. We have hundreds of thousands now literally applying to the VA for benefits for all kinds of reasons, unknown, undiagnosed diseases, as well as post-traumatic stress syndrome. And that is one area we do have an obligation. We should and we can take care of the veterans. Isn't it rather ironic in the announcement yesterday that our president said, well, one place we need to do a little bit of cutting is make the veterans start paying for more of their services. I thought that's really brilliant. But cutting back, and it's not like this is my idea.
Never talk about cutting wars.
A lot of Republicans in the past had this belief and conviction. And even President Bush, when he ran in 2000, talked about a non-interventionist foreign policy. He talked about, no nation building. You don't be the policeman of the world. Yeah. And he won the election. But what have we had ever since? Both parties pursue these wars. Even Obama. Obama was the candidate that was saying, we need to bring these troops home and end this. It's not ending. Even in Iraq, that is a mess over there. And Afghanistan is a mess. And if people would just look at the history of that region, it doesn't look good for us unless we do come out of it. But we're probably in close to 150 countries, over 900 bases, $1.5 trillion a year. We're still subsidizing Japan for their defense and South Korea. We subsidize Germany for their defense. Just think if we could just immediately bring our troops home and have them spend all their money here at home instead of overseas. As you probably have observed, and you may have been on the receiving end as well, if you say something like that, you say, oh, you don't support the troops, you're un-American, you're not patriotic. I'll tell you what, one of the things I'm proudest of, and I don't usually about this, but I'll tell you one thing I'm proud of is the fact that the donations from active military duty, they send more money to our campaign than all the rest of the candidates put together. ago when they first mentioned that to me, and it has continued, I thought, well, that's real interesting. You know, like I had a moment of a bit of a surprise, but a pleasant surprise. Then I got to thinking, you know, I was drafted in '62 during the Cuban crisis. I ended up being in the Air Force for 5 years. But in '65, I was getting off active duty, and I stayed in the Air National Guard. I went back to my residency. In '65 was year they escalated. LBJ was escalating in Vietnam. And I got to thinking, well, I was in the military, and the president was talking about escalating the war and spreading it over into Cambodia and all this, but that was the last thing in the world I wanted. So that's the way, we have good people in the military. They're there for the right reason, especially in the Guard unit, in the reserves. They're in there because they want to protect our country. And look at how they've been dragged around and sent multiple times overseas. And so, no, it's very logical for the military people to say we want a commander-in-chief that will be cautious. You know, being cautious would mean turning it over to you to help make the decision, because it should be your representative in Congress to make a major decision. If it's truly necessary to go to war, let Congress declare the war and win the war and get it over with.
Yeah.
Idea now that we have so little respect for our Constitution and national sovereignty. It started early on, right after World War II. When you think about it, Korea, we went in with a UN resolution, no president, no congressional authorization. We did that in Vietnam, and we do it with all these wars. It actually got a little worse with Libya. The president didn't bother telling anybody. You know, he just goes and shifts the funds around, and there we are in another war. And we're actually in 6 wars right now that we're bombing countries. And it just seems to be strange to me that that wouldn't annoy people. You know, some people think it should annoy them. Oh, they wouldn't be that annoyed that they'd want to come here and do us harm. But I tell you what, if somebody came here and was doing that to us, I bet we'd all be unified, independents, Democrats, and Republicans, because we would observe it. So it's very logical to me that our policies overseas like this, it annoys a lot of people. It's also bankrupt. That's why I think it'd be so much easier to start cutting there. And then we can whittle away the departments and all. But it is misleading to hold your breath and think that this super committee and Congress and the president have every week or two you hear a new plan on cutting. Do you know that not one of those plans has anything to do with cutting? Because there's only one budget that counts, and that's this year. And there's no plan to cut anything this year. Their plans are, you know, I think the super committee is supposed to cut $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, and all they're cutting are the proposed increases. So, and I think most Americans are probably pretty disgusted with it, and they understand it, and I think that's why people, you know, aren't too happy with what's happening. But no, we'd have to have true cuts, and but we need to free up the economy, free up the people. Our liberties are undermined, our personal liberty. All we have to do, I think symbolically, one of the things that shows, you know, how intrusive the government's been is all you have to do is get accosted by a TSA agent at our airports, and then you realize probable cause. Yes, this little girl. We have to, you know, prod her and do all things. Elderly people and all this. This is disgusting. And this has come out once again with this atmosphere of war, whether it's overseas war or this whole idea of passing the Patriot Act after that. I don't think we need the Patriot Act. I think the Patriot Act is an attack. We do need a reinvigoration of our belief and conviction in what made America great, our constitutions and liberty. Our Constitution is not perfect, but I'll tell you what we're dealing with now with absolutely no respect for our Constitution is much worse. I'm delighted that my personal beliefs, which is for the protection of liberty and self-reliance, is so close to what the Constitution was written for. So that makes it a lot easier for us. If we had to write a brand new Constitution, it'd be a lot different. And I'm afraid we're going to, you know, meet a more difficult crisis because you already see it you know, around the world. When people don't see their entitlements, people believe entitlements are rights. But they don't have an entitlement to your life and your property, but some people believe that is the case. So when those entitlements don't come, they say, I have a right to this, and they get angry because the wealth is shrinking. And that's why we should be concerned about this. But if we would step back and restore, you know, sound money and balanced budgets and individual liberty, yes, there would be some liquidation of debt, the healthy kind of liquidation of debt, like the banks and the others should go bankrupt. Like right now, we shouldn't be bailing out Greece. Greece should go bankrupt. You shouldn't have to pay for the Greek bailout.
Right.
Those things, I think in a year or so, we'd really be back on our feet. We have examples of this. Inflation is the creation of the bubble. The Fed came into existence in 1913. It printed a lot of money. We had inflation for World War I. And back at that time, they didn't think they had to bail out everybody. So there was a sharp depression in 1921. It was over in a year. I mean, really sharp, and came right back again. And right now, though, we're doing what we did in the Depression. We're doing what the Japanese did. And that's why they've been in the doldrums for a couple of decades. And we're now, depending on when you want to date it, at least 5 years. I think it's closer to 14, 15 years that we've been slipping. And we're not going to get out of it unless we have a renewal of the understanding of how markets work. So this is what is involved very much in this campaign. I can tell you what. We're getting a lot of good reception, and although we have a mixed crowd here, I have to tell you, when I go to the universities, this is very encouraging because it's the young people who have to study and understand this, because we have a lot of replacing to do in Washington, D.C. So they're willing to study. There has to be a lot of studying, because in our universities, they're not as likely to teach about, they're going to teach why the Federal Reserve is necessary, not teach what Thomas Jefferson and others believed, that we're supposed to have sound money. But it's very explicit in the Constitution that we shouldn't have a banking system that we have today. So there's every reason to be concerned, but there's every reason to be encouraged. I think that enough people awaken and realize that something has to be done. And we just need to understand that freedom is a message that is not only worth selling, it can be sold. And I think that's what the business should be about. So this is what we've been doing, and the reception has been good, the fundraising has been good, the organization is going well, but there's still a long way to go. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but all I know is we're way ahead of what I ever dreamed of. I never dreamed that even 10 years ago that we could get this many people so interested and involved. And then even 4 years ago, I thought it was overwhelming, but now it's just magnificent about what is happening. So I'm very encouraged. I want to thank you very much for coming, and let's charge on and defend our country. Thank you.
Yeah.